So you learned a bunch of different equations that explained how carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was increasing the acidity of the ocean. First, water plus carbon dioxide makes carbonic acid. Then that carbonic acid is going to bind to carbonate that's in the water. It'll bind to carbonate that's floating in the water. It'll also bind to carbonate by stealing that calcium carbonate from shelled organisms. And shelled organisms kind of get screwed in the matter. So again, this is just a recap of that. Here is before ocean acidification. Carbon dioxide still existed in the water. Carbonic acid still existed in the water, but not that much. Some of this carbonate was turned into that bicarbonate, but again, not that much. But today, what we have is we have more carbon dioxide, therefore we have more carbonic acid, and more carbonic acid is going to bind with carbonate in order to make that bicarbonate. So we're stealing this carbonate that's around in the ocean, as well as taking carbonate from these shelled organisms. One of these shelled organisms that's being hit the hardest is coral. Usually when people think of coral, they think of a coral reef, like that outside of Australia in the Great Barrier Reef. But coral isn't just that huge structure you see. Actually, coral isn't that at all. Coral is an animal that lives on that structure. This is a super zoomed in picture of coral. This coral is maybe the size of your pinky. Coral makes a skeleton. That skeleton is that huge structure you see when you think of a coral reef. Coral, if you look at a coral reef, you usually see different colors, but that color isn't from coral itself. Coral is clear, and you can see that in this picture. It's very see-through, similar to a jellyfish. The reason they have color is because of the algae that live inside of coral. This is what we refer to as a mutualism. So mutualism. This algae and this coral live together. They have a relationship with one another, a relationship in which both of them benefit. Now, algae is a producer, meaning it undergoes photosynthesis. So photosynthesis, as a review, takes carbon dioxide plus water and sunlight, and it creates, I'm just going to write food and oxygen. Coral is an animal. Coral needs to eat, and it only undergoes cellular respiration. So it takes food plus oxygen, and it creates carbon dioxide and water. Well, look at that. The algae needs carbon dioxide and water, which the coral makes, and the coral needs food and oxygen, which the algae makes. So they're both directly benefiting one another. Algae is also getting shelter, so also getting a place to live, which is incredibly important for that algae. This algae is what gives it color. In this picture, this would look like on the outside some sort of green coral. But again, the coral itself is clear. It's the algae giving its color. But this is very, very important because if coral doesn't have that algae, if something happens where that algae left, the coral actually can't survive. It can survive for a little bit, maybe a month or two, but it wouldn't be getting enough food and enough oxygen to survive. So what happens with coral is when pH changes, or when temperature changes, or there's a storm, or really any kind of stress, coral bleaches. And when I say bleaching, what that means is it is expelling, it is getting rid of that algae. And it does this because the coral is just stressed out. It's just like, I don't want to deal with anything, and it literally would just expel and get rid of that algae that's inside of that coral organism. The reason it's called bleaching is because if you actually look at it like you see over here, it looks white. It looks like it's been bleached. That coral is still on there. What you're seeing is the skeleton underneath. That skeleton, which is what that coral animal makes, that skeleton is made of CaCO3. This is calcium carbonate. And there is not an I in here. So that skeleton is our calcium carbonate. that coral was making the skeleton underneath it. And the skeleton is really, really important for animals living there because tons of small fish and other animals use it to hide in. So when coral is stressed, such as with oceans acidifying and it's not making its shells, making its skeleton, when coral is getting too warm, if coral is getting too cold, if coral is undergoing a storm, it gets rid of that algae. Within a couple months, if it does not take algae back in, that coral ends up dying. And these skeletons incredibly important for biodiversity, go away and they start dissolving. So really, really big changes to our ecosystem. So there's a video that is looking at this coral bleaching and how corals have changed over the past couple decades. There's some really cool technology that we're using in order to record these changes. So go ahead and pause here, take a look at this video, and kind of learn about what we're learning about corals around the world. Coral isn't the only organism that uses calcium carbonate. There's tons of different organisms that use calcium carbonate. Here is an example of a snail species that was used in a lab and that was in different conditions of carbon dioxide levels. Now, I will say that in the lab they were using tons of carbon dioxide. We're talking 800 parts per million. 800 parts per million is kind of our guess as to how much carbon dioxide will be in the atmosphere in about 100 years if we do everything wrong and we don't start making changes. So although they achieve this through the worst case scenario, just kind of showing you, given worst case scenario, it only takes a month and a half for that organism to nearly be completely dissolved. Other organisms have been used in experiments. This is called a pencil urchin. And you can see like they've lost all their spines. They don't have enough carbonate to even make the spines. Those spines are an important defense mechanism. This is a conch shell. You've probably seen these shells before, but there is an animal that lives inside them. Here's a normal conch shell, and here's one that's been so dissolved there are holes in it. So not only can this conch not build its shell because there's no carbonate, but the acid is taking that carbonate away. So these organisms are greatly being affected, and even if we don't eat this urchin or eat that snail, that it's going to permeate in that food web and could affect us directly. Interestingly though, some organisms are benefiting from that bicarbonate. So as a review, when we have H2CO3, so carbonic acid plus carbonate equals bicarbonate. So bicarbonate. Some organisms, they make a shell, but their shell isn't made of calcium carbonate, it's made of bicarbonate. And these organisms are actually benefiting. So here's an example of crabs and crayfish that are actually growing bigger and faster than they used to. So when given a lot of bicarbonate, they're growing much bigger. Now, for humans, this actually sounds kind of great, right? We eat crabs, we eat crayfish, we eat lobsters. So this sounds great. And in that sense, I guess it is. But in the ecosystem, this isn't great. These organisms will probably eat more. And just like our shelled organisms kind of deteriorating and losing populations, these guys have to eat a lot more to sustain their population. So essentially what we're seeing is a whole ecosystem imbalance. And that's happened in the past. Ecosystems change. The dinosaurs went extinct. But that took a long period of time. The dinosaurs didn't go extinct overnight. It still took a couple thousand years for them to go extinct. But with these guys, I mean, we're seeing this in our lifetime. And the ecosystem just hasn't had a chance to balance itself out yet. So although this may seem beneficial in the short term for humans, sure, it is beneficial. But it is going to cause effects on our ecosystem. One final note that I want to make about this ocean acidification is it's not the same everywhere. Just like climate change. Climate change isn't warming the entire planet, only parts of the planet. This carbonate is not dropping worldwide. Carbonate is going to drop where carbon dioxide is highest. So again, if we have more carbon dioxide, so more CO2 equals more carbonic acid, which then equals lower carbonate. But there's not a lot of carbon dioxide everywhere in the world. And think about water, because we're talking about carbon dioxide going in the water. If you think of a soda, when it goes flat, it's because that soda's been open, and if it's warm outside, it went flat quicker. Warm water does not hold carbon dioxide as good as cold water. So these graphs, what we're looking at is different projections of carbonate in the water worldwide. Here's 2000, 2050, 2099. Blue is good. Blue means high level of carbonate, and carbonate's good. We need that for our warm ecosystems. We need that for all ecosystems. Carbonate is good because our shelled organisms need it. And if you look at all of these graphs, where do we have all this blue? Near the equator, where water is the warmest. But just like your soda, if the soda is cold, it's going to hold that carbonation. And it's the same thing with the ocean. Areas where it is colder, carbon dioxide can enter that water a lot easier. So what we're seeing is here in the poles that we have more carbon dioxide that is diffusing, that's mixing with the ocean water. Therefore, we have more carbonic acid and less carbonate, which can be used by our shelled organisms. So although this is a worldwide problem, it's not happening evenly around the world. And I will still make a note that carbonate is going down along the equator, just not as quickly as it is elsewhere. So what can we do? Pretty much everything on this slide is going to be things that we talked about with climate change. This is because we release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So we can be more fuel efficient. So if we're using fossil fuels, investing in hybrids or electric cars where we're not using as much fuel, therefore not releasing as much carbon dioxide. We can also be energy efficient as well as practice energy conservation, not using fossil fuels as an energy source to begin with. With our efficiency, looking at, yes, we're going to use this light bulb, but not use as much. So the ocean acidification problem directly linked to climate change. We have more carbon dioxide, but that carbon dioxide is not going everywhere in the ocean. It's mainly going to colder regions. No matter where that carbon dioxide is going, shelled organisms such as coral, which will bleach, urchins, shells, they're dissolving, they're breaking down. Meanwhile, lobsters and crabs and crayfish are getting bigger. That seems great, but we're looking at a huge ecosystem imbalance that won't be sustainable in the long term. But don't fret too much. We can change this, and you and I can change this by reducing our consumption of fossil fuels and lowering the amount of carbon dioxide that we release.